This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to this week's very special panel of experts, because this week we welcome 4 of North Carolina's top journalists to our panel to get their views on our Reporters Roundtable. Please help me welcome Doug Clark from the Greensboro News and Record, Rick Henderson, editor of the Carolina Journal, Scott Mooneyham, syndicated columnist with the Capital Press Association and the Insiders, and our longtime friend Cash Michaels with the Wilmington Journal and the Carolinian. And by the way, Cash has, I've got to say this, Cash has just released a new documentary movie that he produced, spent almost 2 years on, called Pardons of Innocence, the Wilmington 10. It premiered in Wilmington 2 weeks ago. 500 people stood and gave rousing standing ovations. Congratulations, Cash.
Thank you, sir.
Well, usually you guys are the ones that are asking others the questions. I want to turn the tables on you and ask your opinions this week. Kim Strock, the executive director of the State Board of Elections, revealed to lawmakers that a cross-check of registered voters in 28 states identified 765 persons who may have cast ballots in 2 states in the 2012 elections. It also indicated 35,000 people with the same names and dates of birth who voted in more than 1 state, and more than 13,000 who were registered to vote in October but were in fact dead and have since been stricken from the rolls. Recent records indicated 50 instances of votes from these people, however. Response to the report was highly partisan, Republicans claiming it proves the need for voter ID. Democrats seem more interested in discrediting the report and denying the need for voter ID. Scott Mooneyham, you've covered this beat for many years. You've had contact with Kim. In her report to lawmakers, she cautioned them that her office was still investigating and determining if there was, in fact, voter fraud. But some seem to want to attack Kim in the office as a partisan political operative here. What's your reaction to what she reported?
Well, she was reporting numbers that were presented to her from this database cross-check. The bigger issue, she acknowledged herself, as you said, that she only had gotten the numbers recently. The bigger issue was that the politicians ran off with the numbers without, there's been no, up to now, there's been no cross-checking to go back and find actual people, talk to actual people to find out what the numbers really mean.
I thought it was extremely interesting, Doug, that they were really interested in discrediting her in the report instead of saying, wow, if there really is voter fraud in North Carolina, we need to know more about it and do something about it. Weren't you?
Well, exactly, and she's got a track record. She's been a bipartisan investigator of election fraud and other issues, so I don't have a concern about her integrity. I think we've got problems with voter registration rolls. When this story broke, I checked my son's voter registration. He's lived in Virginia for several years. He's still registered to vote in Guilford County. Now, he hasn't. I promise he hasn't done that.
I was just going to write that name down.
But we're not getting our voter rolls kept up to date, and that, I think, is a genesis of a potential problem right there.
Well, Rick, this is an interesting point Doug brings out, because it was this last year's legislature that said, hey, we haven't been doing cross-checks in the past. Let's do this, and let's find out if we have this potential problem in North Carolina.
Yeah, and I think it was a very good move by the General Assembly to do this. It's a difficult system to track because people do move from state to state. You do have a fair amount of in-migration and out-migration from North Carolina and elsewhere. And so this was the first step. If you've ever been in any kind of situation where you've been in a classroom and the teacher would ask the question, okay, how many of you have the same birth date? Well, quite often you're going to have people who have the same birth date, and so it's not unusual to have this kind of crossover. But what is more unusual is you have people with the same first and last name, same birth date, same social security number. Nothing is proven yet, but this is sort of the first step in the process.
Yeah, and a few legislators, Cash, said that the State Board of Elections ought to make these names public so that we can know who these people are. Kim came back and said, no, wait a minute, we haven't proved anything. There's an ongoing investigation here, and they do have some rights of privacy. Is that the right approach to take?
Well, certainly, of course, and that's the professional way to go. What strikes me about this is that for the Republican lawmakers who have, taken the bone and run and said this is evidence of voter fraud, then I would think, given the fact that they have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the governor's mansion, that if it's voter fraud, they'd want more of it. because it doesn't make any sense.
It's helping them.
Yeah, if it's massive voter fraud, then I think you want more of it, because so far you're doing pretty well by it.
But weren't you a little bit surprised at the vehemence, the attacks that came as a result of this? I mean, Bob Hall in Democracy North Carolina, and I think the world of Bob, but I mean, he just immediately wanted to discredit this thing before anybody even knew what the facts were.
Well, it is a little bit suspicious, and I'm not saying suspicion on the part of Kim Strzok. It's a little bit suspicious. Remember before, when folks kept asking, when the Republicans were pushing for voter ID and other restrictions, and folks said, where's your evidence, where's your evidence? And the Republicans would say, well, it's there if you look for it, and you just haven't looked for it.
Well, and Scott, that's what they did say. We don't know because we haven't looked.
Well, but then I think, though, what you have to look at is the legislative leadership immediately came out and said, see, we told you, this is voter fraud. Well, until you track down actual people and talk to them, you don't know you don't know what those numbers mean, and that's a basic problem, to draw conclusions like that and to make these big political pronouncements. They're trying to defend the law they passed last year, and they're trying to use these numbers to
and
do
knowing
that.
Kim and her record, frankly, we will find out what the situation is, and I'm sure it's a topic we'll be talking about in days to come. Here's a programming note for our viewers in the Greensboro, Winston-Salem High Point market. In 2 weeks, NC Spin will no longer be broadcast on WFMY, but you can find us on Time Warner Cable on either Channel 65 or Channel 69 every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Be sure to mark the new time and channel number. And if you're a Time Warner subscriber, you can now find NC Spin at Time Warner on demand or on a channel on your cable system. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, to see the list of channels and times. Raleigh-Durham viewers will still find us at our regular times on WRAL and Fox 50, as will viewers down in the east on WITN. But in Greensboro, Winston-Salem, be sure to set your DVR for either Time Warner Channel 65 or 69 Sundays at 10 a.m. because we want to keep talking to you. When we come back, after these messages, we're going to get 3 weeks and counting before the elections.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
The average consumer now is honest. They want to know just the facts. Well, really, they want to know if that animal primarily has had a life that is conducive to that animal enjoying its life. Our job is to produce a real good, solid calf. We keep them purebred out of purebred Charolais cattle, and we can keep them healthy. It's a low-stress environment, so that's my system. It's been a blessing.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
Meet the candidate that public policy polling has shown to have the best chance of defeating Kay Hagan this fall.
While mayor of Shelby, we cut the crime rate to its lowest rate in 30 years. We created jobs and economic opportunity in an otherwise stagnant economy. I plan to bring the same trust, experience, and determination as your U.S. Senator from North Carolina. I'm Ted Alexander, and I approve this message.
We now return to NC Spend.
In about 3 weeks, voters will be asked to select the party nominees in the primary elections of 2014, and we want to ask our panel to give us their perspective on what to expect. Question one to all, and Rick Henderson, I'm going to start with you. What's going to be the mood of the people, and what's going to be the primary issue on their minds as they vote May 6th?
Jobs, jobs, jobs. And jobs in the economy, surprise, surprise, is going to be a big issue in this election. And I think people are still not at all certain that we're in any sort of solid economic recovery. There are national issues involved, such as health care reform and the like, but I think that it really is North Carolina, what path is it on economically, and that's what people are going to talk about.
Doug, do you concur, or do you think there's another issue?
Yeah, absolutely. A UNC High Point University poll just out confirms the economy is the #1 concern of voters. They say they trust the Republicans a little more than the Democrats to deal with that issue. But on the other hand, they're not really feeling this so-called Carolina comeback here either, and it's the Republicans who are in charge. So it kind of cuts both ways. I don't really know what impact that's going to have.
Cash, you going to make it a threesome?
I certainly will. My question, though, is, primaries have a unique way of bringing out the extremists in both parties. So who's going to show up for these primaries is my question. And in the Democratic Party in particular, who's going to show up? As you know, there's a massive split there right now. So, are we going, we don't have too many primaries dealing, say, with Kay Hagan or what have you. There's nothing there. But nonetheless, though, when you have a party that's almost fighting itself, then who shows up to the primary to vote for whom?
Scott?
Well, it's absolutely, we have to keep in mind it's a primary, and certainly the issues y'all are talking about might have more play in a general election. The big thing that's going to be driving the top ticket race is going to be that Republican U.S. Senate primary, and they're going to be that's going to drive Republican voters to the polls in the primary, and you're going to see that tension between the Tea Party Republicans and the establishment Republicans.
Yeah. Rick, we've got an interesting scenario setting up for this election. Traditionally, the party of the president in 6 years after, 2 years after the second term begins, loses seats in the Congress. For the governor of North Carolina, the same is pretty much true. After the second year in office, that party usually loses seats. What's your prediction and what's your feeling about what's going to happen in North Carolina as far as the legislature is concerned?
I'm going to be most surprised if nothing changes at all as far as the partisan balance is concerned. There are very, very few seats that are rated as competitive by the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation, which tracks this based on voting records. I think they have 2 contested Senate seats now held by Republicans they call competitive, about 4 or 5 contested House seats now held by Republicans they call competitive. And so I don't think we're going to see a lot of turnover. I think we may see a loss of maybe a half dozen seats at the most, but we will see surprises. That's the one thing I will guarantee, that if we see some changes, there will be a surprise. A family issue will cause a candidate not to run as well as he or she would have, or there will be a scandal, or there will be some ethical issue, and it'll come out of nowhere. But that's about the only thing I can really predict.
So stay tuned.
Right.
Doug, we learned this week that there's probably been better than $15 million already spent on behalf of the U.S. Senate campaign. And there are millions more, obviously, that are going to be pouring out over the airways between now and November. It's the most expensive Senate campaign so far in the nation, and is definitely going to be the most expensive race that's ever been held in North Carolina, surpassing the 84 Hunt Helms.
Yeah, 25 million.
Yeah. Why is this so fierce? What's going on here?
Well, it may be the race that determines partisan control of the U.S. Senate. And Kay Hagan is vulnerable. She's tagged with Obamacare. I think if it was not for Obamacare, she would have an easy path to re-election. But it's her misfortune that's a little that's unpopular right now. Interestingly, the poll I just cited a minute ago, people trust Democrats more than Republicans to deal with health care issues. And yet Obamacare is still very unpopular.
Scott, one of the things that was interesting this past week was that Governor McCrory came out and essentially endorsed Tom Tillis for the Senate nomination, saying he had the best chance of beating Kay Hagan. What did you think of that?
Well, certainly he has a long-time connection with Governor McCory has a long-time connection with Tom Tillis, so that's not, I guess it's not terribly shocking. And you know what? He's reflecting the opinions of a large number of Republican
insiders. In fact, many people are saying this is likely to turn into a runoff. Anybody disagree that that's probably going to be the case?
I don't.
You don't think it is?
No, I think it will.
Yeah.
And I think that potentially hurts Tom Tillis as well.
All right, Cash, there are going to be several debates to be held prior to the primary election. One of them here on WRAL, one of them from UNC or Time Warner Cable. There was a lot of discussion and debate about which candidates were going to be invited to attend and which ones weren't. I know it would be, with 8 candidates running in the GOP primary, it would be just, having done some of these before myself, it'd be unworkable to do. But don't you feel like the voters probably need the chance to hear all these voices?
Oh, there's no question. The question, though, is how do you filter out, who's a legitimate candidate? Mind you, obviously you pay your fee and you run, you are, but you have to have some standard, some threshold as to who legitimately has a chance of even winning.
This runoff, if there is in fact a runoff, is going to be January 15th. July 15th. I'm sorry, I said January. Boy, that's much later than what we normally have. What's the reasoning for moving it so late in the cycle?
Part of it is to get around the legislative session, because the short session will be...
Is that to help Tom Tillis?
It may turn out doing that. It may actually hinder him to some extent, because if the General Assembly is in session for a while and there are some contentious votes up there and he needs to move some people one direction or another, it could take him off the campaign trail.
Now, so far, none of these candidates individually have been on television. Have you found that sort of interesting? I mean, there have been support groups, independent expenditure groups, back and forth raising Cain about this, but the candidates themselves hadn't been on TV. Scott, what's up with that? They don't have the money or what?
Well, I think they're holding their money. They're going to wait, and particularly everyone except for Tom Tillis has a very limited amount of money, and so if it costs $1 million to run a week of statewide ads, then those candidates that have less than that or about that are going to wait till the end to do that.
All right. After these messages, we're going to come back and talk about film tax credits.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
An experienced leader who knows how to get the job done. Keith Crisco. As North Carolina's top job recruiter, he helped bring 120,000 jobs to our state. And Keith Crisco will use his experience to help create more jobs. The first member of his family to graduate college, Keith Crisco will fight for our public schools, community colleges, and universities. And he'll protect Social Security and Medicare for our seniors and generations to follow.
I'm Keith Crisco, and I approve this message.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce health care costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in health care matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with a medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our health care investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
The best part about being a member of a Touchstone Energy Cooperative is that it's your Touchstone Energy Cooperative. Learn more about the power of your co-op membership at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
1 in 5 North Carolinians can't buy healthy foods in their communities, increasing their risk of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Learn more about the food insecure and what lawmakers can do to help at accesshealthyfoodsnc.org.
We now return to NC Spin.
North Carolina's tax credits for film production companies in our state is set to expire at the end of the year, and there's been a lot of discussion as to whether we should continue them. Professor Robert Hanfield of NC State prepared a study that said for every dollar in tax credit the state issue, we receive $9 in direct spending and $1.52 in tax revenues back. But a memorandum by the Fiscal Research Division of the legislature said Hanfield's report is full of errors. Fiscal Research estimates the return on investment is less than 50%, and they say if you factor in state tax revenues, the film production tax credit results in a net fiscal loss. Doug, so who should we believe here? The professor from state or the Fiscal Research people?
I think it's always good to look with some skepticism at all economic impact reports.
Spoken like a true reporter.
And you know, Rick can speak to this better than I can. He's written a column on about this. But you know, I would just say in the past week in High Point, there's been an event that has poured more money into our economy in 1 week than the film industry has in years and years, and that's the furniture market. Economic impact study by Duke University last year put its economic impact at $5 billion a year. Maybe that's a little exaggerated as well, but it costs the state less than $2 million a year. So there are a lot better deals out there than the film industry.
Cash, I guess the more cogent question actually is not who we should believe, but who are the lawmakers going to believe? Are they going to go with Fiscal Research? I mean, they deal with these folks all the time.
Well, you know, the Republicans in the General Assembly seem to have it in for the film industry for some reason. I don't know what it is. I think, for instance, when you had the #1 movie in the world, Iron Man 3, you would think, and the kind of money that's put in the economy down there in eastern North Carolina, you would think that you would pay attention. And yet, for some reason, Republicans seem to say, no, that's not really true. And I have a hard time with that. If it's creating jobs, then that's what you ultimately want.
But aren't those jobs, Rick, aren't they temporary jobs? Isn't the spending temporary? I mean, going back to Doug's point, couldn't we do something that is a recurring kind of thing, even like the furniture market?
Well, a lot of the jobs that are created by the film industry are for crews that come to the state, they set up, and they go away. The production companies themselves, like Cash mentioned Iron Man, that production company was set up to run that film. When that film was completed, the production company shut down. All the profits went to the home studio. It was almost like a shell game in some ways. And so that's one of the problems with the film credits is not that to the extent that they create jobs or not, they create some that tend to not stay, but also that the way that the corporation's set up for tax purposes, the state gets almost no fiscal benefit, at least state government doesn't.
But Scott, Sharon Decker, Secretary of Commerce, says that she fully expects that there's going to be some sort of extension of the film tax credits. Given this latest revelation by Fiscal Research, you think she's right?
I think there may be some type of extension, but it won't be in its current form. And then the question becomes, if you scale back what's offered right now, is North Carolina competitive anymore with these other states that are doing more? You know, there's certainly a great point to be made that Rick's made about
we're chasing rabbits.
The temporary nature. But there is no doubt that these other when this war between the states, it has an effect on whether those movie companies come.
All right, after these messages, we're going to come back and talk about that short session of the legislature, so stay with us.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Nobody ever imagined a mammogram machine being subject to CON law. If I want to invest our business dollars into technology that I think is going to benefit my patients, my customers, we should be able to do that. I think it's time to take a law that was intended to protect the citizens of North Carolina and now is harming them and change it. I'm Dr. Bruce Schroeder, and I support CON reform.
Visit reformconnow.com.
It's true. Farming is different than it was 50 years ago. We know consumers have questions about how our food is grown today. North Carolina livestock farmers want you to know that they're using the most responsible and caring farming practices to feed our state.
ncanimalag.com.
On May 7th, the legislature will convene for what's commonly called the short session. Cash, there are a lot of big issues to be acted on this session, including teacher pay, Medicaid reform, yada, yada, yada. Many are predicting it's going to be a short session. Tell us what you think the big issues are going to be and when they're going to adjourn.
It's an election year, so I believe tax reform definitely will be on the plate. Republicans love running on that, and I think that they will be out of that building and on the campaign trail by July.
Wow. All right, Scott?
They're going to have to do something about coal ash. You're going to have to pass a bill that addresses coal ash. They know that, and so that's going to be one of the defining issues of the session.
Your prediction when they'll adjourn?
I think they'll adjourn by July, too.
Start of the new fiscal year? Rick?
The big issue is going to be privatization of the Commerce Department, and the fact that that didn't run through quickly during the long session last year means it may be in trouble. The administration wants to move ahead anyway, but I think there's going to be some results or some resistance in the Senate. And I think they'll be out by July also.
Doug?
I think one of the big issues is, are they going to take local tax revenues from the city again in the form of privilege license taxes, keep pushing around the municipalities?
I didn't hear Medicaid reform. I didn't hear teacher pay. It's going to be fun. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll return to our regular format and take on more issues of interest to the people of North Carolina. Until then, we hope you've enjoyed this Reporters Roundtable. Stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.